All right, we have started. I think this is our, I want to say fifth webinar. I am Danielle Kohler, and joining me today is Becky Hilliker, a new face for you guys, if you haven't met
Hi.
her already, since she is on staff with us as our senior editor, I think is your current title. Next year, she's going
Yes.
to be general lady something is where,
Majesty, I don't remember.
Majesty, that's it.
We're workshopping the title.
Yeah, we're working on it. And joining us today are two middle grade authors. I know, Eleanor, you've written another book outside of middle grade, but we're focusing on Kidlit today. So we have Susan Diamond Riley and Eleanor McCallie Cooper, who both have a lot in common. First of all, you both have three names in your author names. You're both from the South. And like I said, you've both written middle grade novels, and they have cultural and historical elements weaved into them. You both also have some teaching experience, or sometimes a lot of teaching experience. So I thought that was interesting. All right, we're gonna start with Susan. Oh, and I should also mention that everybody who has joined us, use the Q&A feature at the bottom. If you hover your cursor over it, you'll see the little Q&A icon. Leave your questions there. We'll be looking at them throughout. So if anything ties into our conversation, we'll, shout it out live. Otherwise, we'll get to your questions at the end. All right, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Okay, we're going to start with Susan. She has written the Delta and Jax Mystery series, which has 4 books. I'm only showing 3 of them here. The latest is The Sea Devil's Demise, as you can see. She holds a Master of Arts degree in children's literature and is a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which I think is really cool. And the South Carolina Writers Association also. And the Island Writers Network as well. And you can see all of the awards that she's won for her books here. And she's going to be talking a lot about school visits. And our next author will be presented by Becky.
Yes. So here we have Eleanor McCallie Cooper. She's the author of Dragonfly Dreams, has a doctorate in education from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. She lived in Japan for 2 years, teaching English, which apparently also that became an inspiration for the book. Is that right?
Yes.
And you can see here she's lots of impressive awards as well. So this should be a fantastic conversation.
And before we started, I was talking to Susan about if awards matter, which why don't we just get that out of the way now? Susan, what were you telling me about awards?
What I have found is that a lot of awards do cost something to submit to. So you do have to keep that in mind. But particularly when you're marketing to educators, having award-winning books really gives credibility to what you've written. And so when you've got teachers and school boards and superintendents deciding whether or not to use your book or whether to use somebody else's book in their schools, the fact that your book has won some reputable awards is going to make a difference. I found that makes a difference. Eleanor, what have you found?
I found that awards were very helpful in several different ways. First of all, I researched what awards I was going to apply for based on what I thought I was appropriate for. My book was appropriate for, and also what I thought I might win. And
Right.
so I would advise that. And you have to do that too, by the way, in the first year. You have to do that right away. You can't wait. So that was one mistake I did make, waiting a little too long. But the awards are also good for promoting because they do their own promotions. They not only do social media, but some of them do radio or podcasts. It's a great experience to be on a podcast with as an award winner. You do good experience and good exposure, and then you can use that podcast on yours. Some of them do reviews for you. Some of them put you in their magazine or whatever their network is. So all of that was part of my research to see, who are these awards, how they connected. And just one hint I'll get, I didn't worry too much about reputable, mainly because I didn't know what was reputable and what wasn't. But I assume they all were if they were out doing this. But most of them are annual, and so you're competing with everybody in that year. But some of them, one of them particularly is quarterly, and so therefore the pool is smaller because it's 4 times a year, once a year, and so you're more likely to get recognized in that kind of a pool. So anyway, all those things are part of, but I definitely highly recommend the awards approach.
Eleanor,
Yeah.
we've gotten a question from Madeline Weiss about when to apply for awards, and you kind of touched on that a little bit because a lot of it is going to be the timing. But do you have any recommendations about when, if your book was coming out like in November, were you just looking for any of the awards that you qualify for timing wise, or were you trying to time them out in a different way?
Well, first of all, I signed up for Book Award Pro, and I got that on the Kohler site, and it was extremely helpful because it told me which awards were coming up, what the deadline were, and what they were looking for. And they also know what your book is, so they only tell you about those awards. So I highly recommend that.
Okay, great.
Book Award Pro. I haven't even heard of that.
It's on your website.
We got a lot of information on our website.
Somewhere under resources for writers, somewhere in there. Good luck finding it. So I use that, but you can start before your book actually comes out. They will take your manuscript, which you have because you've applied to, Kohler's working with you and you've already got it. So
once you have an ISBN number,
yes,
most all of them will
ISBN
want the
number
ISBN number.
Yeah. So yeah, and you just send that. It's all done electronically anyway, and so I'd start before your book comes out.
Okay.
Where did you both list the awards? Like on your website? I think Susan, you were saying that you printed it real big when you would go to the fairs. And did you have something to give to administrators or teachers with the awards?
I ended up, when my most recent book came out, it was my 4th book in the series. And so I used to do bookmarks or something like that. I had too much information now. And so I printed up a brochure that has all 4 of my book covers on the front. And then inside, there's descriptions of all the books. There's a bio of me. There's a description of the type of presentations I give. But there's also a section with, it doesn't list all the awards. It has actual images and icons of all the different awards that my books have won. So that when they open it up, that kind of smacks them in the face. And so I found it having all the information in that one place was best to give to teachers and any school representatives, but also when I'm at book festivals or even when I just sell a book. If I sell someone one copy of my book, I stick that brochure in the book before I give it to them if I'm selling it to them personally.
Yeah.
So
Eleanor,
we've had a question.
Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I was saying we had a question from Tucson. Hello, Ethel. Who's wanting a few more specifics about the Kohler Awards. And so I just wanted to put out there that that's on our website under our Author Center. And there's actually a spot that says Getting Reviews, Endorsements, and Awards. And if you click on that, that should give you a lot more information.
Oh, every time I want to, okay. Author Center, Getting Awards. Here we
Excuse
are.
me.
All right, I'll just real quick. Here is on our website. This is what Becky was talking about, Author Center up here, and Getting Reviews, Endorsements, and Awards. If you go there, you can find information. And I assume that's where, one more time, Eleanor, Award Pro, what was it called?
Book Award Pro. If you keep scrolling down, somewhere you'll see the word resource. Author's resource, and it's
must be somewhere else, because this is just a list of the awards that we tell you to consider.
Look for,
but we've got so much information on this website that I often forget where things are. But this is a good place to start for sure. If you scroll all the way down, it'll have the awards here, and it's got I was going to say the IBPA and Royal Dragonfly Awards, which Eleanor won both of. Those are big deals. There's lots of Nautilus is a huge deal. That one's really hard to get, I would say. We had a YA fantasy author, Natasha Belair, won that, and I was shocked because fantasy doesn't win a lot of, I don't want to say it doesn't, but I don't think it gets taken as seriously as some other genres. So we were really pleased with that. Thanks. Chock full of information on your website. Yes, it is. Which is the whole point of us doing this, is to provide more information, be as educational as possible. Okay. So pivoting from the awards, like I was going to say, we usually start with your elevator pitches. So let's pretend for these purposes that you're pitching to a teacher or administrator, so an adult. Susan, do you want to give us your short elevator pitch?
Sure. My books are the Delta and Jax Mystery series, and they are a group of 4 historical mysteries set in the Carolina Low Country and Sea Islands. And the books feature a brother and sister duo who are 10 and 12 years old at the start of the series. And they're from Chicago, but they visited their grandparents in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. And while they're there, while the books take place in the present, they continuously run into mysteries that they have to solve. And each book, they encounter a mystery from a different era in the past. And they have to use a combination of wits and relying on each other and their friends and family, and a little bit of magic in every book to solve that mystery. And each book, because I do use a lot of real history in the books and real places and real people, there's a section in the back of each book called Fact or Fiction that kind of clarifies for the reader what they've just read that is based on real history and real people and real places, and which parts were just for fun, so that they come away realizing that while they thought they were just reading a fun story, they were actually learning all along the way.
Eleanor, I know you have a lot of historical elements in your book as well, so give us your elevator pitch.
Well, let's see. I might start with my story is an Anne Frank story on the other side of the world. And if that doesn't get their attention, then I have to go into detail. But, takes place in China in World War II. At that time, Japan occupied China, and Americans were considered enemy aliens. So my protagonist is a 10-year-old girl whose father is Chinese and whose mother is American. So the story centers around how she has to protect and keep her mother hidden throughout the war, and then ends up saving the family ultimately. So and it's based on a true story. My aunt married a Chinese man in the 1930s and was in Japan, married a Chinese man. Did I say that anyway? She was in China when the Japanese took over and when the war started, and she stayed because her family was there. And so, but that put her family in jeopardy. They had to keep her hidden throughout the war so she wouldn't be put in an internment camp. But the difference is with Anne Frank, the family did live, she lived, and they, at the end of the war, the American Marines came in to liberate China, and one of the Marines was from her hometown. And he knew about her. He knew that she was there. Everybody had said, go look for her. And he found her.
That's great.
So
Wow.
That's great. So, another thing we talked about is, you're pitching to adults most of the time, since they're the ones making the decisions and have the money. But let's say that there's a 10-year-old in front of you. Do you change what you say? Do you make it a little pithier, a little shorter? Do you say, do you like magic? You don't have to give us your elevator pitch to a 10-year-old, but is there anything that you change in it?
I do. I focus more on the actual plots of the books when I'm talking to the kids. I leave off the fact or fiction part, and they don't care about awards.
Sure.
With the kids, I focus more particularly on the suspenseful part of the story. I might tell them that, in this book, they find this mysterious item, and then this strange person is following them around, and they find a treasure map or something like that. That is going to get them more involved in the actual adventure of it rather than the educational aspect of it.
I do the same thing. When I'm talking to kids, I emphasize it's more grounded in the story and the plot, and it's her best friend, and they're in a secret garden, and they create a hiding place where they can leave messages for each other. So it's totally different approach.
Yeah, you
Well,
gotta know
so
your audience.
well, can we build on that just a little bit? Because we're about to get into marketing, and of course, the main point, like we've talked about, is that in your case, which makes your genre a little more unique than others, is that your readers are not necessarily your customers. And so you're marketing more toward the adults, trying to get them to buy the book for the younger readers. But do you do any type of outreach or marketing directly to young people? Have you tried anything like that, trying to build buzz with these younger readers? Or has that just been kind of, it's better, your money's better spent to target the actual buyers?
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it. Do you?
I don't. No, I don't do TikTok videos or anything like
Okay.
that. Of course, when you're in schools, or particularly if I'm at a bookstore or I'm at a book festival or something like that, and if their kids come walking by, usually it's more adults. If I see a kid come walking by, I'm quick to call them out. Hey, I've got a book for somebody just your age. I'll do that. But no, I don't expend any money on, TikTok ads or anything like that, because as you say, they are not the ones ultimately that make the purchase.
Fair enough.
All right. So we are going to talk a lot about school visits. So I think one big question that people have is, how do you even find schools to contact, and how do you contact them? Do you just Google and do a cold call? Do you have contacts? How does just contacting them work?
I found now, because my books have been around for a few years, I just have them contact me. I don't have to reach out. Although I did at one point prepare a list within, a 1 hour distance of me, all of the schools and the media personnel. They're often the person you contact. But I would recommend that people just start with their local schools, contact the people there. I had found that through my membership that I got involved in organizations before my book actually came out, so that by the time it came out, I already knew people in various writing groups, and I got to know the owner of our area school. She's a children's bookseller, so her bookstore only sells children's books. And so she had contacts with everybody. So if they would contact her saying, we need somebody to come for an author visit, then she could give them my name. So contacts help. Contacting them personally, usually the media person, which used to be called the librarian, is the person to contact. And to start out, especially, you need to be willing not to expect a huge payment, or maybe not any payment at all at first.
First starting out.
Eleanor, what did you find?
Well, when my book came out, it was COVID, right in the middle of COVID. So school visits weren't really possible. And so I had to think of other strategies. And then there were a couple other factors. One was that since my book is about China, and it's set in World War II, a lot of schools, especially middle schools, don't get there. So and I'm living in the South and in East Tennessee, and really China is not often studied. So I wanted to find an audience that wanted a book about China. And then the third factor might have been the fact that I was 75 when the book came out. And so that's a lot of work to go to school. And so I said, well, how can I conserve my energy and target my efforts a little better? So I did come up with a good strategy, and it was not school visits, but it worked directly with teachers. And that is, I researched who what teachers are teaching about China? And this wonderful resource dropped in my lap, and it's a magazine called Teaching About Asia, and it is for middle school, high school, and college level. And it's exactly what it says. It's teachers who are teaching about Asia. So I figured if they're already teaching about Asia, this was a good market. So I contacted them. They featured me. They did a special feature on middle school. So they featured me as one of those authors on the cover and 6 pages inside the magazine.
Wow.
And then a webinar. And so this was a national pool of teachers, and all of them teach about Asia. So
that's great.
I didn't have to convince them about that. And then also they did the magazine, they did the webinar, and then after that webinar, there were spinoffs of regional resource centers for teachers asking me to do one for their teachers. So that's what I did instead of visitations. And I have done some visitations and loved it. And if circumstances were different, I would do a lot of that.
Do either of you, we have a question. Do either of you ever reach out to PTAs? Has that been a...
You know, I have not reached out to PTAs, although I have been at book fairs and had people who were part of like homeschool groups, you know, or homeschool organizations that I've talked to. But no, I tend to deal more directly with the personnel at the school themselves.
Now that brings up a really great idea about like the homeschool movement has grown so much in this country over the last 10 years in particular. How did you two find ways to kind of, how did you access that market, since they're not typically, and you're not gonna be able to find them in the yellow pages?
I have found them through other people, or like I said, I do children's book festivals in my area, you know, within an hour and a half, 2 hours of my area, or just regular book festivals. But children's book festivals in particular, you get a lot of homeschool parents coming because they're looking for that kind of information. And especially if your festival is on a school day and people show up with kids, then they're a prime target to reach out to. So I've not done research on it, actually. It's just been a matter of people that have crossed my path. But that's a great idea to do that, to actually research them and find the groups.
I'm going to jump in here and do a little bit of a self-promo, just because I too have written a middle grade novel around the same time of COVID. So maybe I think a year after you, Eleanor, or maybe just 6 months after you. So I know I know what you're talking about. Everything was virtual when I launched too. And I even, for those who don't know, I live abroad. I live in Chile. My book is about a girl, an American girl who comes to live in Chile and experiences all the nature and animals, and it's got magic and everything. And I planned a trip to the US to do some launch things there, and just nothing was happening. Bookstores weren't accepting people. I tried to go into the school and they couldn't host me there. But what I found, I thought it was so interesting that you said this, Eleanor, was, schools don't get there with China, and they don't know anything about where I live either. But I found, so what happened with me was just for the US, local contacts got me in. So my sister, I didn't even ask her to do this. She pitched my book to her kids' teachers. And they go to a private school in North Carolina, and I guess needed a book to study, and they contacted me and made it like the book for their unit. And I did a virtual presentation for them and basically taught them all about the animals and the culture and everything from here. And they're things that nobody had heard of. And I think, like your book too, who's heard of World War II in China? I mean, a little kid who's 10 or 11 goes, World War II in China? Like, it's not something that is normally taught about, but that's what makes it so interesting. So I think that no matter what type of book people have written, because Susan, I think you have a really strong advantage locally because your book includes those local elements. So you can kind of pitch it that way. It's like, oh, learn about the Low Countries. Is it the Low Countries, what it's called, right?
Right.
But no matter what you've written, even if it's fantasy, because my book is fantasy, there are things that you can take and teach, even if it's just how to be an author. I've found that kids, when my presentation was kind of just wildly, it would start with my inspiration. It would then teach them about the culture from here and how things are different. And then I would end in, so maybe you want to become an author. How does that work? What's the, and it was all in a 40-minute presentation. And kids were really into it and they would ask me all these questions. So for those of you, that have written a book that you think might not be historical or it might not get into curriculums, kids are still going to want to hear from you, even if you're just teaching about the process of writing a book.
Right.
Was my experience, at least. So.
Yes.
Yeah. And I do still think there are some things happening virtually for those of you who don't want to travel. Maybe it's not a bad idea to contact, like I said, if you have contacts in another state, like your sister or somebody can get you in and you can do a virtual presentation. Not a bad idea either. I had that school order for their entire class. So,
yeah,
not a waste of time.
Yeah.
You were going to say something?
As far as sales of books, I actually found that book clubs were a good, maybe a better use of my time, because there was no hesitation among adult book clubs to read a book about China in World War II or a child's point of view. That didn't bother them at all. In fact, it actually gave them access a little better. So in book clubs, usually everybody in the book club buys a book, and they spread the word of mouth so much. So, and I would encourage them to. I'd always say one way you could help me is tell your friends, especially in other cities, So, that was.
How did you find the book clubs?
Yeah, good question.
I think that's a good question too. I think it was word of mouth. I think especially when the book came out, people just started calling me. And so I can't give you an answer. The word just got out. Maybe it was
maybe
some
just
of the publicity I did early on.
And making yourself available on your website, making it clear that you love to talk to book clubs. Since we're all sharing, I also had a novel that came out, although not a middle grade YA novel, but historical fiction. And it came out well before the pandemic. So that I think things have changed a little bit, but at that time there was a site called meetup.com and I haven't even looked to see if it's still around after COVID, but I'm sure something similar to it. But I started finding all these book clubs listed on Meetup and started contacting those. And is it still around?
Yep.
Oh, good. It's a great resource, I've thought. But I ended up finding several book clubs, and in my local area, I probably went to 6 or 7 meetings. And then as that started to spread, then I was able to access some that were kind of part of almost like national networks. And then I just made it very clear that I was available and willing and super happy to Zoom. Well, Zoom wasn't a thing then, but I was FaceTiming in. Someone would bring their computer and then put that up there and I would chat with them. And because they don't get a chance to talk to authors a lot. So when you make yourself available, a lot of times book clubs will be really interested in that because they want to talk to authors. But if anybody has any new ideas about how to reach out to book clubs, it is hard to find them because most of the time they're organic and homegrown. It's just me and my neighbors, and we don't have an online presence or anything like that. So getting that word of mouth going is important.
That's a really cool meetup.com. You infiltrated them and you would just pitch them as an author. Is that what you would do?
Yes,
Say, hey,
I'd be like, hi, I'm in the area and this is the book and I see you're a book club and if you're interested, then I'd love to come and chat with you and I'd love to come to one of your meetings. And I also got a lot of great snacks that way. And a lot of wine. But yeah, no, they always have great snacks. So I was sure I'd fly across the country for that. So it'd be fun for me. But I did go to a lot in, like you said, within an hour and a half. And
this is the website she's talking about. And I did want to, I was going to share, all of us have documents and things that we've made, but this is Eleanor's website. She has a page for schools and book clubs on her website for everybody who has a website, which we always recommend you have a website. whatever you're trying to get into. So if it's schools or book clubs, have a page on your website for it. If you're trying to get into podcasts, have a page on your website for media interviews that you've already done, all of that. So, you know, Eleanor said, I don't know how they found me. Well, you've got all the information listed there. So anybody who goes to your website here. And then Susan, I know that you,
go back for just a minute because I want to say something about that. Yes, you're right. I was promoting that on social media, of course, but I put a lot of things on that site that were visual, and I think that helped a lot. It helped, like that map there. Kids could use that to orient the kids in the story. All the photos are based on the true life story, and that got a lot of people's attention because, gosh, this is true life, and they want to see the photos.
You've got a timeline.
Yeah, and then a timeline, historical timeline, and that's mostly for adults, but that helped.
Yeah.
And then also questions for teachers to use. So a lot of, a lot of visual things. I think that really helped.
Yeah, I had some slides. Susan has one of these discussion questions for each of her books. I just put one up here. And then you've also got, you teach a couple writing courses and had shared some of those. So I think it's always good to, if you're trying to get into book clubs or schools or whatever, be prepared with these documents already. So yeah, I put those up there as well. Because my book had illustrations that I had made, I actually made, I went like,
cool.
Put everything up there. Coloring pages, how to draw a puma. I had like my study guide was massive. I even put up a reader's theater, which I thought like nobody was going to use. But then my book got translated into Spanish around the same time. And this year, I worked with a local nonprofit who actually does, they call it like Carnival of the South. Here I'm translating. And they got a bunch of schools involved to do these little like less than 10-minute scenes from my book, and all the kids made the magic, everything. And so that was something I never thought was actually going to happen. But you know what? If we don't put it out there, it's never going to happen. And I was amazed. So if you want to get into something, just make sure that you do some of the little background work, like having those study guides and everything like that. And like Eleanor said, for book clubs as well, it doesn't have to be in schools. So, and that was a cool piece of information, Becky, about the meetup.com. I think there's like neighborhood apps. There's so many apps nowadays of how to, I think like there's even like a Bumble app for just finding friends. I don't know. Anything you can imagine. As long as you're not shy, gotta pitch yourself. But yeah. All right. Okay, so Susan, why don't you walk us through like a normal school visit? And like we said, this could be virtual, but I think most of yours, at least in the beginning, were in person. So what would you do? What would you bring? Who would you talk to?
Well, first of all, when I'm contacted to do it, I ask them what they want. And on my website, I have a list on the brochure that I put together. I have a list of different types of presentations I do. So they might want me to talk about just being an author. How do you get to be an author? They might want to talk about the particular book and the history in that book, or the nature in that book, or something like that. Sometimes they want me to give more of a writing workshop, a hands-on thing, or an editing workshop, because I'm also an editor. And I was invited to speak at a university because it was to their graduate school English majors, because I had a master's in English. And so they wanted me to talk about what kind of careers are awaiting you if you have a master's in English, because I've done a lot of different things with that degree over the years. And so I have all these different talks available and kind of somewhat prepared. I tailor them to that talk. But first I have them tell me what it is they want. And then when I get there, even if they want me to do, say, a writer's workshop, I'll start out by telling them that I'm an author and this is the kind of books I write. I'll do some background on that. But then I'll dive in to what I'm doing. Some people do PowerPoints, and if I'm doing maybe a history presentation, I might do that because I'll have more visuals to show. But I like to be more conversational when I do my talks. with kids especially. And so I don't always have visuals. Sometimes I'm just out there down in the crowd talking to them. Payment is different too. That's something you kind of need to figure out up front as well. Sometimes they will want to give you an honorarium straight out. Sometimes they'll say, well, we can't pay you, but we can buy this many copies of the book. And sometimes it's a combination of those. Early on, I often went, especially to my local schools, for no payment at all, just because I wanted to get the word out. And word does travel. So even though you might feel like, oh, I just spent a day of my time doing this and I didn't get any actual money, and maybe you don't know how many book sales you're getting, I still think it's worthwhile to do that, especially at the beginning, just so people know who you are.
Would you bring anything to give out to the kids, or just your brochures?
If I'm doing a workshop, I'll have a handout. I have bookmarks from my first couple of books I did with Kohler, and so I might give them all bookmarks. If they'll have the discussion questions if we're there. Sometimes I bring candy. One of my books, the kids are looking for treasure, and so I happen to have a big treasure chest that's full of beads and suckers and Tootsie Rolls and stuff like that. So sometimes there's a little of that bribery going on, but hopefully they're going to be going home with the book. Hopefully that's what their big prize is going to be, that they're going to purchase a book. Or sometimes the schools will arrange ahead of time for the parents to order the books ahead of time.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Okay. And Eleanor, you can either talk about what you do for book clubs, or or class visits, whichever you prefer.
All right. Well, one thing I will say about class visits, and I've done third, fourth, and fifth grades, as well as sixth grade. I think that's a really good range, and their reading ability is different, and their knowledge of China and World War II and all that is very different. So you have to really, adjust. But I found that the younger grades like visuals. So I worked with my map, and I had them trace the plot of the story on the map, which the teachers loved. And then I also, the fact that I use Dragonfly, and I want to talk about this a minute, because actually in my book, it's called Dragonfly Dreams. And I make a big deal at the beginning. The opening scene is about the two girls, the best friends, and a dragonfly it lands on the arm of one of them, and the other one says, "Don't kill it, because it means change is coming and it will give you good luck." And I just made all that up. And I use the dragonfly. The dragonfly has nothing really to do with my story, if you can imagine. But I knew I needed something real, an object. I needed something physical. And nature gave me a great gift, of course. But then also I turned the dragonfly into a necklace that my protagonist gives to her best friend at the beginning of the war. So that necklace becomes their touchstone. And so it's the dragonfly connection between them. And their dream was to see each other again, for the war to end, for there to be peace and see each other again. So I used that imagery throughout the book. And then I use it to promote myself, because I'm the dragonfly lady. And I come with jewelry, earrings, necklace, sweatshirts, whatever, to emphasize the dragonfly. And I think that really appeals to the students. They remember that. And then they'll come up to me and say, "Oh, I saw a dragonfly today." Stuff like that. So that you have to think about that when you're writing the book. But for young readers, I found that very helpful.
Sort of like a gimmick.
It's more like a gimmick.
Don't be ashamed to have a gimmick.
But it's also establishing a connection with them. Everyone likes to feel a connection. And, that's my book was about the Civil War. And so everyone wanted to come up after me and tell me, "Oh, I had a grandfather, I had and tell us and talk about those kind of things," because I think we're just all humans and we want to have a human connection. So when you can figure out those ways to make those connections, especially with kids. It's even harder as adults. So
Right.
finding that's going to be memorable to them, I think that's really smart.
Mm.
And that's a great way to then humanize it. And like you said, you'll be rememberable.
And
Rememberable.
dragonflies are international. Every country has dragonflies.
I was wondering that because
And they, uh-huh.
yeah.
Huh.
No, I
And,
was just
and
wondering.
they're meaningful usually. People do their stories, myths, legends.
Mm,
So dragonflies have some substance. Plus, they're beautiful, and so
Mhm.
I do promote it through nature teachers too.
mhm. And how do you usually prefer, or how does it work with payment? Do you require they have a book order? Do you do it for free? Do you require payment up front?
I don't charge to go. Some of them automatically have a honorarium,
Mhm.
that they give. But if they don't, I don't say anything about it, and I hope they would. I do ask if they would, um, if I could send a flyer home with the kids to the
Mhm.
parents. And so I wanted the parents to know this was something they were reading in school. Would they, if they wanted to buy it,
Mhm.
no pressure or anything, but just if they want to, here's where it is and here's where it is. So, I was trying
Perfect.
to encourage sales.
Yeah, you gotta hook them. That's their call to action right there. You can't just leave them interested and then not have a way for them to actually buy your book. Otherwise, they're just gonna be talking about the dragonfly lady, and the parent's gonna say, "And what was the book?"
Yeah.
Some dragonflies. I don't know, in China. All right, Google dragonflies in China. I don't know. So that's, yeah, you gotta give them something to go home with. Pretty smart. Um, Okay, did you guys have anything else you wanted to elaborate on the school visits before we talk about things like social media? Is there anything else that people should know?
Not that I can think of, unless people have questions.
All right, well, if anybody has questions, remember you can put it in the Q&A and we can move on, and then if we get some, we'll open that up at the end. But okay, so then, like I said, pivoting. Social media is really big nowadays. Where did you all focus your energy? Where was the best bang for your buck? How did that work?
I put up a couple posts a week I have a professional Facebook page separate from my personal Facebook page. And I pretty much only put book related things on there. Sometimes they're about my own books. Sometimes they're about other people's books. I also have a blog that's for adults that has to do with Low Country history. I figure that's kind of become my gimmick of sorts, is I'm the Low Country history lady. And so that way it's a connection with the adults that might be buying the books. So a couple times a week, 2-3 times a week, I'll put something up on that webpage, but I have never used an Amazon ad, or not an Amazon ad, a Facebook ad. I'll put things on Instagram sometimes, but I've never done, as we said earlier, I've never done TikTok or anything like that. So I probably don't utilize social media in that way as much as is available to me, but I'm not familiar with it, and so I do the best that I can. How about you, Eleanor?
I'm glad you were honest, because I was struggling here. How honest will I be on this? But I really tried hard at the beginning, and I think for about a year with social media, I really wanted to do it, and I felt like I could. And so I have, like you do, an author page on Facebook that's separate from my regular.
Mhm.
I have an Instagram account that's separate from my regular, and I
Mhm.
have a Twitter. Well, it was Twitter then. So and I posted regularly, and I even hired a younger person at first to help me do that. But after a while, I got a knack for it, and I thought, well, I can do this on my own. But I actually struggled, and it was not the thing that got me were the hashtags. I didn't know
Mhm.
how to find those places where you should hashtag, and so I was doing these random hashtags, and so if you haven't tried it, you don't know what I mean. But anyway, I was not getting good responses through that. You have to build up, your audience, and somehow I wasn't doing it very well. So I kind of ran out of steam on that, and I keep thinking I'm going to go back and do that again, and I think I will. But
Well,
they're all still there. You can still go and see my.
This is something, Eleanor, because I worked on your website. I used to work on a lot of author websites, and people would ask me which social media should I be on, and I would say, probably Facebook, Instagram if you're gonna post some photos, Twitter, like if you like being, but I would always say if you're not going to be active on them, then just don't bother, because there's nothing worse than going to somebody's website, clicking on a link, and then they have one post and it's from 2 years ago. So if that's what you're going to do, just don't bother. And I think you guys are kind of a testament to the fact that not everybody's strategy is going to be the same. And nowadays, everybody's focused on social media, but everything is your time and your money and patience and learning. And you two use your skills and, your teachers. So you know how to talk to people in person. That's what you do all day long. You know how to teach people, you know how to be in front of a crowd, and that's kind of what you focused on instead of social media, maybe. So it's not that you don't have it, you do have it, but it sounds like it's not what you're relying on, like you've taken other means. So for everybody else who feels like I'm in over my head on social media, here's 2 people that can show you there's other ways to go to sell your book.
Yes.
So thank you for your honesty.
Well, and you want to play to your strengths. So if that's not already your strength and it's not a natural place for you, then there's nothing wrong with finding, well, what am I good at? Where do I feel comfortable? Because that's where the authenticity is going to come across. And that's what people are going to be appealing, are going to find appealing.
All right, let's see. Becky, did you want to take a question?
Sure. Well, I think kind of pivoting off of that a little bit, what do you think that was the best marketing decision you made, and where'd you get the biggest bang for your buck? I guess, if you had to pick kind of what's your best success story?
I think my best, from like a book sales perspective, and I have to trace it back to some of the groups that I got involved in initially. The Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators and the South Carolina Writers Association. The Island Writers Network is a local group. I live in a pretty artsy area, but through those connections, I was able to get involved with, and I also volunteer for the Pat Conroy Literary Center, which is really big in education. And through those connections, I was recommended by one of those people to initially to get involved with my local school district. And I think that's a great idea to start, have you start with your own little circle and then expand out. But I started with my local school system several years ago when my first book came out, and they purchased a lot of books for the school, and they then that became, first it started out with one school, and then it became more district wide, and it just kind of grew whenever
you got your book picked up by the library.
I did. The local library had a summer reading program several years ago, and they bought like 1,000 copies of the book. I didn't even know until I saw an ad in the paper that this summer reading program was coming. They had, like, for every week of 6 weeks of the summer, they had a different book they had chosen, and they were going to have these books available for people to come get free at the library. And mine was one of them. I didn't even know it. And this summer, I got a call asking me to come speak at this one with a summer school class, because they had adopted it. My second book, I believe, they had adopted it to be part of their, well, it wasn't part of their summer school curriculum. They wrote their summer school curriculum around this book. And so it does have an educational value to it. So that helped, of course, and they're adopting it. But any of the field trips that the kids went on were to places that were mentioned in the book, and they had speakers come in from different organizations to talk about some of the history, and they had me come in a couple times, and of course purchased a lot of books. and they were saying that they were really happy with it. The lady that was in charge of it was really happy, and she was going to present it to the school board so that next year this was at one school, but the whole school district would be using my books, but they wanted to use all of the books. So each grade would do a different one. And this was something that I didn't request at all. It was just because I had gotten my foot in the door initially through the connections I made. And then I kept in touch with those people. You know, once I've done an event with the schools, I always follow up with a thank you email or a note. And I keep in touch with them. If I have a new book come out, I reach out and contact those school people. And if I had the gumption to do it, I would spread it out to more and more schools. You know, I've done it in this type of thing in more school districts than just my own local one, but I haven't reached out to maybe the school that my kids graduated from, or the schools that my nieces and nephews go to. But those resources are out there. And I think once you get your foot in the door with a school system that is happy with you, then maintain that relationship, build on that relationship, ask them if they know of any other schools that you could want, because that can lead to some pretty large bulk sales.
Well, Susan, you're fantastic. I think you embody what my principles are of starting out, and what advice I'd give to new authors or new books is start where you are with what you've got and who you know. And the who you know means you're building on relationships of trust. They know you. They have no problem with that. So you have done that, and I think it sounds great. I would say in my case, I'll say something good and something not so good. But the one thing I do think applying for the awards was really helpful. It gave me a credibility that I wouldn't have otherwise. And it gave me some outreach as well. One thing I did a little bit of was a paid advertisements. I love the magazine Story Monsters Inc. It's great for kids and schools and libraries. But and I did pay for a couple ads in that, and I've got listed on there. They have a huge list. You have to pay a little bit for that too. But after a while, I quit doing that. It's just you can't keep paying. And I have no idea. That's the thing about advertising like that. I have no idea if it has any impact whatsoever.
Right. Print advertising, yeah, you can't track. There's no clicks.
There's no way. And so I just started doing things that were closer to home, and you could have felt more contact from. And the book clubs were definitely my best deal.
Book clubs,
right? Well, so on that same vein, what would you not do again?
Well, not advertising, paid advertising. I wouldn't bother. And that's one thing about the awards. If you get the award, they do free advertising for you. So I would not do paid advertising.
I was telling Danielle earlier before we started that when I first had my first book come out, I was signing up for every book festival I could find. I was going to have a booth at a book festival, and sometimes they want you to pay like $200 for a 6-foot table at a book festival. And I did it because I was just so excited to get my book out there. But over time, I've come to realize that you don't have to say yes to every opportunity. There are a lot of those things out there, but you shouldn't have to pay big money for it. And for some of the larger festivals, Decatur, Georgia has a huge book festival, and it was going to be very expensive to have a booth there. And then I realized that the Pat Conroy Literary Center, which I told you I volunteer for, they were going to have a booth, and they invited me to come and be at their booth, and they were going to sell my book. And then I realized that the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators local group was having a booth. And since I was a member of that organization, they invited me to come and sell my book at their booth. So I didn't have to pay for those because I had already paid dues to these organizations. Or in the case of the Pat Conroy Center, I paid my time to the organization. But and then there are plenty of smaller events that are still going to get good traffic where you're not having to pay a lot to do that. And so I think at first maybe you feel like you have to put some money out there to get your name heard, but over time you should try to wean off of those where you're having to pay out, because the book sales that you have to achieve at those events to make it worth your while and to even break even might not be reasonable.
That's a good point.
Good advice. Eleanor, so on the advertising, would you not do any, like including digital advertising, or do you mean just print that you really can't track? Would you consider doing a Facebook ad or an Amazon ad or something like that?
Facebook is interesting. Yeah, they offer ads really cheaply. And yes, I did some of those too. Yeah, but again, you have no idea. You have no idea what impact it has, but yeah, I felt like Facebook reached a lot of people, and I would do
We
it.
have another author who did Amazon ads, and he's had success there. And with those, they do tell you. I think that's probably one of the only ways you can tell, because with Facebook you can tell clicks, but you can't tell sales. It doesn't translate. With Amazon ads, they tell you when they turn into sales. So, but again, it's another investment. He's had a lot of success. He's on another one of our webinars, Bill Kennedy, so he talks about it a little bit there. But we have to wrap up because the hour is almost up. But I think this has been a really great conversation. And I thank you both for being here. I think you bounced off of each other perfectly. It was like flawless. And before we go, I just want to say this has nothing to do with Kidlit, but our next webinar is already scheduled for November 12th, and it is focusing on biographies. So like I said, might not pertain to anyone here, but I think it's going to be an interesting conversation because these people have written about, actually both of them have written about people in their family, and they've both had success getting it out there. So how do you find your market and learn how to network and all of that? Completely different than fiction, and in this case, obviously Kidlit. So we're excited to talk to them. Other than that, once again, thank you both for your time. And this will be up on our website and YouTube, so everybody who missed out can see it there. But thank you, Susan. Thank you, Eleanor.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.